Welcome back to Historical Raven. I'm Raven, they, them, and this is Pop Culture, Nerdom, and History, where we dive into the intersection of fiction and history. Before we begin, there are a few notes, and I'm going to add a content warning here. This episode will discuss war, torture, police brutality, death, Nazis, and Nazi collaborators. On the timeline of the incidents in Andor, I'm guessing they could have happened across a single day or multiple days. The time gets weird with Star Wars, as we all know. Discussing the historical events, this is a dramatization based on historical documents. Events may or may not have occurred the way they do here. The problem is that information on the milice, French for the militia, they're hard to come by in English sources. I actually had to go looking at French sources, and French has not been my strongest language over the last 20 years. 5 BBY, Morlana 1, Morlani System. Two corporate security officers follow Cassian Andor after trading words with him in a high-end brothel. The men, on a power trip, attempt to shake down our hero until a scuffle occurs. The skinnier man takes a head to the face, falls, and hits his head, dying as he does. Andor, holding the blaster now, turns on the bigger man, who now notices his friend is no longer moving. Going to his knees, he calls out for his friend to answer before realization hits him. Turning to the still-standing Andor, his eyes go to the gun held to his face. Andor stares down at the man before pulling the trigger, killing a second person in the span of a few minutes. Days later, more than a dozen Preox Marlana Authority security force members get ready to raid Ferrix, another planet in the Morlani system. The man leading the inspection team is Deputy Inspector Cyril Karn, wanting revenge for the deaths of the two men earlier that week. He gets his men ready and then sends them to wait for a landing. His boss, Chief Hine, had wanted to sweep this case under the rug, saying the two men were out where they weren't supposed to be, doing stuff they shouldn't have, and suffered the consequences for it. Cyril couldn't let this stand and worked behind the chief's back while the older man was on Coruscant. The sergeant working under Cyril informs the men they will split up into 3 teams. On Ferrix, the 3 teams, north, east, and west, land on the 4 sides of the small city before walking in. The west team, led by Cyril, walk directly to the last known address of Cassian Andor, barging in and taking his elderly mother into custody while ransacking her home to find evidence of Cassian's whereabouts. They are interrogating Cassian's droid when Cassian calls. Realizing who is trying to contact the droid, one of the men begins tracking Cassian's location. The men leave the Andor house and storm deeper into the town. As the West team makes their way deeper, announcing who they are, someone rushes to ring the alarm by banging on a metal pipe. A moment later, the sound of more pipes being hit with metal joins the first. People of the town rush away from the security teams, closing their shops and locking up their houses. The North team informs the West that they have found Cassian and are going in. The West team tells them not to, but a blaster fight erupts inside the building. Simultaneously, the East team makes their way through the town. When they watch a woman stop and begin running away from them, the lead man pulls a blaster and demands she stops. When she does, they take her into custody and cuff her to a pipe on an outer wall. The man holding her against the wall slams her head against it when she attempts to run away, causing a gash to open up. When a random man accosts the team and then runs towards the woman from the stairs, he's shot. He's dead before his body stops at the bottom of the stairs. The security officer who shot the man has his blaster taken from him and ordered to the transport ship. A call from the West team has the East team leaving the area to help. The North team moves in. Just as they do, an explosion comes from the front door, killing one of the men instantly. The rest of the team moves in and finds 2 men, Cassian and an older man, who begin shooting. Heavy engines, held aloft by large chains, begin falling. In the firefight, 2 or 3 more members of the security team are killed. A call for backup, and that 2 suspects have escaped goes out from the north team. The entire inspection team forms up in different areas, trying to cut off the escape route. The roads and alleys now empty except for the security team. When an explosion comes from where the transport vehicles wait, there's a call over the radio that there might be more suspects. As they wait, Cyril is captured by Cassian and the older man before being tied up. A moment later, an armored vehicle rushes through the streets. The men fire on it immediately. The vehicle, containing Cassian and the older man, continues as three security officers stand in front of it. They jump out of the way right before they're hit, and the two suspects get away. Preox Morlana Authority security forces are made up of men and women who are born and raised in the Morlana system. They know the local dialects and cultures, who has lived on those worlds, and who has recently arrived. The Empire gave them a watchful independence. While employed by the Preox Morlana Corporation, their loyalties are to the Empire and upholding the laws of it. The Chief Inspector's main goal is to keep that independence from the Empire's meddling by keeping the Empire's order. April 1943, Marseille, France. Deputy Department Chief Paul de Gosowski sits at a cafe waiting for a contact. La Milice Française, or the French militia, had been formed in January in reaction to the multiple resistance groups that had arisen across the country. Days earlier, members of the secret army had sent him an invitation to meet. He either ignored the invitation or had said no. Taking a moment to enjoy himself, Degowski doesn't see a few men walking towards him. The men, sent by the secret army, wait as long as they can before pulling their weapons. Coming up to Degowski, the men take aim and fire their weapons. Paul is killed immediately, and the men walk away quickly. His body slumps forward onto the cafe table as people watch in shock and horror. Members of the regular police and the milice rush to the scene moments later. This is the first successful assassination of a member of the milice. Days later, the milice conduct a raid to find the people responsible for the assassination. Blocking off multiple roads, members of the militia walk through the streets and pound on doors. Civilians rush home as they see the milice coming, knowing what's about to happen. A few members of the resistance grab their weapons, but most rush to hide in a safe house or secret passages. 10 members of the milice see a few people rush into an alleyway and pursue quickly. They catch up with two people, a young woman and a younger boy, and hold them at gunpoint until a superior officer can come and interrogate them. A few of the men leer at the young woman, who clutches the boy closer. While the Nazis didn't like the idea of French collaborators having weapons of their own, these weapons were left by the English military or other forces. One street further, a small group of milice force their way into a house they suspect belongs to one of the men who killed Paul. They pull an elderly man out of the house roughly before throwing him to the street. The man glowers up at the militia and curses them. He gets a baton across the skull for his troubles, cutting him open, and blood stains his shirts. A bit further down, the sharp crack of a gun fills the neighborhood, and the milice surge forward. Two men in uniform are down, bleeding from the leg as they pull themselves away from the street. As their backup arrives, they point to a second-floor window and keep pressure on the wounds. The man with a firearm sets up and begins shooting back at the window as other men force their way to the front door and then inside. Inside the house, the milice force their way deeper and up to the second floor. A short firefight later, the militia drag two men and a woman out of the house, the woman bleeding from the arm. One of the militiamen carries an armful of weapons he had taken from the second floor room. The two men have bloody faces. The three are held against the wall of the house as the raid continues. 20 minutes later, a total of 6 suspected resistant fighters stand against the wall of the house, held there by men aiming weapons at them. The young woman and boy are not among the 6. The 4 men and 2 women stare at the militiamen as the officers get ready to order their execution. People in their homes, still cowering, watch the scene or hide deeper to keep their kids away from seeing what's about to happen. The team leader shouts its command, and 6 men fire their weapons. The suspected resistance fighters crumble to the streets, dead before they hit the ground. In a truck outside of the raided area are 5 people who had been arrested in connection to the death of the Gostowski and to the resistance. The 3 women and 2 men will be taken to Milice headquarters and tortured while interrogated. Only 2 of them will survive the ordeal. For the 19 months that the Milice existed, they were more feared by the people of France than even the Nazis. Like members of Primor Security, the members of the Milice were born and grew up in France. They grew up in the areas they patrolled. They knew the locals and had informants throughout the towns and cities. Paul Degowski was born in Saint-Nazaire and had lived in Marseille for years before joining the Milice in 1943. Pierre-Jean-Marie Laval, the ceremonial chief, had served as the Prime Minister of France 3 times. Joseph Denard, the commander, was a decorated soldier in the French army in World War I and had even fought against the Nazis before France surrendered. The Vichy government created the Milice to fight against French resistance groups that had popped up since France surrendered in 1940. The government needed a way to clamp down on these movements that they could control, and so the Nazis didn't think they needed to put their own soldiers in the towns, though there were times where the Milice would work with the SS and the Gestapo. That, however, is for another episode. Thank you for joining me today on this exploration. I hope I was able to ignite a curiosity in you about the inspiration behind your favorite movies and shows. If you enjoyed this video, or just the race in the background, give me a like. If you want more, think about subscribing. Sources, as always, are in the description below. Have a good day, and see you in 2 weeks.